This is a 2004 Mazda RX8 and I swapped it with a 6-liter LS V8. Why? Because I can. And I'm sure you probably know this, but these cars came from the factory with rotary engines. The rotary this came with, called the Renesis, has some problems. Even the rotary fans will tell you that this one is probably the worst in Mazda's lineup, but between you and me, they've all got their fair share of demons, don't they? Delicious. I had a lot of fun Honda K-swapping my Subaru Impreza. So much so that I decided to immediately double down and swap another vehicle. In the video about the Honda swap, I mentioned that there are better chassis to LS swap than a Subaru, including this one, the RX8. Most Subaru LS swaps end up being rear-wheel drive, and to me, the only thing Subaru's got going for them is the all-wheel drive. Some people took that personally, saying stuff like, I rear-wheel drive converted my Subaru and it's fun. Which, yeah, I'm sure it is, but all I'm hearing is, I bought an all-wheel drive car and regret it because I can't do 6 skids with the boys. Coparter Subaru boys, we all know what's really going on. There seems to be a running theme of me making unreliable cars more reliable, but that's not intentional. That's not why I chose to swap this specific chassis. I chose an RX-8 because they're super cheap, usually because they're blown up, and because they're just super cute. These cars should be a very compelling option for a car enthusiast. Heck, you've probably considered one in the past because it more than likely checks every box you yourself are looking for in a fun car. But after reading about the rotary and the apex seals and the premixing and the flooding, you passed this car up. You didn't even give it a chance. Well, here I am, RX-8. I'm here to give you a chance. But we're gonna have to meet in the middle. The first time I saw one of these things, I was in love. At the time, I didn't know enough about engines to understand the rotary. I just kind of knew that rotary bad. But stylistically, this car spoke to me. I think these things look super neat. And they have cute little things that you wouldn't even know about because they're overshadowed by how awful their engine is. Auto-leveling HID projector headlights, this cute little screen, the doors. Oh, come on, tell me that's not the coolest shit you've ever seen. I remember installing a sketchy HID kit into my 2014 WRX. They looked like shit, worked like shit, they definitely weren't road legal. And this was factory in 2004. There's a lot to love about these cars that so many people haven't gotten to experience. So that's why I chose the RX-8. I want that experience. This specific car wasn't in the greatest condition either. The rockers were rotted out, it had dents all over, and there were clear signs of forced entry around the driver's side door. It's seen some shit. I'd go so far as to say this isn't just an LS swap, but also a restoration. Because, if not for me, this thing would have probably never been on the road again. I think it's safe to say that of the people that buy these with grand dreams to LS swap them, 90% of them never actually do it. Shit, the guy that I bought this from was one of them. So, it would have just sat and eventually returned to the earth, as all things do. I'll be honest, when I bought the car, I didn't realize how bad it was. Like, I knew the thing didn't run, that's why I bought it, you know? But when I got it home and started kicking around the rockers and more of that red cancer just started falling down, I started getting that feeling when you just paid big money for something and it didn't turn out how you expected. The one that makes you feel sick inside because you just blew money on something that totally wasn't worth it. You know the feeling I'm talking about. Regret. Now, thankfully, I didn't pay a ton for it. It was something like $1,300 or $900, somewhere around there. I probably should have been more careful when checking the thing out, but look, I was starstruck. There it was, an RX-8, a yellow RX-8, a car I've always wanted to wrench on right in front of me. How could I not be excited? Anyway, after I cooled off and thought things over, I came up with a plan. I'd rip the rotary out. If it gave me shit, then this would become a parts car. If not, I'd swap it and fix the body somehow. And yeah, it didn't give me shit. No broken or stripped bolts, no rusted out subframes. In fact, there was literally zero rust anywhere but the rockers. Probably because the rotary was piss and oil all over the place. And since I decided to go forward with the swap, I had to figure out what to do about the rockers. And I decided to do something I've never done before. I got the car bodyworked and fully repainted at a body shop. Now, I try to do all the work on my project cars myself, but I just don't have the tools, or frankly, the patience to do bodywork. So, after I got the swap finished up and running, I took it to a mom and pop shop. I was actually really nervous about this. Like, I'm okay with spending that kind of cash on a transmission or on go-fast parts, but I'd never done something like this before. I've never spent this kind of money for someone else to work on my car for me. But then again, I never really gave a shit about how my cars looked. But this one's different. And I really didn't want to have that sickening feeling of regret again, at least not so soon. Thankfully, my fears were unfounded. This thing looks stellar. There's some little issues here and there, but overall, I think I certainly got what I paid for. Unfortunately, I didn't take too many before photos because as soon as I bought the thing, I ripped it apart to yank the Dorito machine out. So you're just gonna have to take my word that they did a ton of work to this car to get it looking as good as it does. All right, we've pole greased about the chassis for long enough. Let's talk about the new spinny bits. I didn't take much footage of me doing the swap because I was busy doing the swap. So I'm just going to put some B-roll in that makes it look like I'm doing something productive. A major reason I went forward with the LS was similar to why I Honda K-swapped my Impreza. I just wanted to play with an LS. All my project cars have been turbo 4-cylinders. Until now. The engine I selected for this build is a Junkyard LQ4. These are usually found in Chevy trucks and vans. This one specifically came from a work van. The van it was in rusted out, as most Chevys do, and ended up in the hands of a local wrecker who I bought the engine from. Well, this is the LS experience. Broken exhaust studs. For the transmission, well, we'll get to that. I've never worked on an LS, or any V8 for that matter. Never even owned something with one. I've also never worked on an RX8. So I was going into this blind, which has been pretty interesting. I just ripped this back panel off to find none other than a 10mm. I'm gonna go out and buy a friggin' lottery ticket. LS swaps are by far the most common swap, at least in my neck of the woods. As a result, there's tons of information on them. So much information that it can be tough to get the info that you actually need. Trying to find something as simple as what oil filter to use can be a challenge because there's so many different types and so many options. Then you go down that rabbit hole of people that have very stern, yet probably unfounded brand preferences. Yeah, I only use OEM oil filters. I used a Fram oil filter once and my brakes needed bled after. I'll never touch a Fram again. There's just a ton of misinformation out there. And sure, a lot of it's from people just not knowing any better, but some of it's more, I don't know, malicious? Like, I read on a vendor site that the stock RX8 fuel system can't handle the LS, so you're gonna have to upgrade to our very expensive pump setup. Yeah, I'll be the judge of that sport. Spoiler alert, it's fine. Even after I installed a more aggressive cam setup, I'm just barely starting to exceed what the stock setup is capable of. Now, LS swapped RX8s are by no means unique. In fact, they're so common that multiple companies make mounting kits just for this swap, one of which I purchased. Went with the cheapest kit, straight off the boat from China. It had some minor issues with fitment and things not lining up, but nothing I couldn't handle here on my own. And I'm glad I did because it saved me from having to booger together my own mounts. I also upgraded the suspension, not because I was worried about the additional weight or anything, but all 4 shocks were blown and one of the springs was actually broken, so I didn't really have a choice. So, for the trans, I bought a brand new T56 Magnum. Yeah, so for my brand new T56 transmissions, I recommend SuperTech, a high mileage automatic transmission fluid. It's not high mileage yet, but hopefully it will be, and this is gonna be something that helps me achieve that goal. For those of you not into the LS scene, I should probably mention that going with a manual trans in an LS swap is actually much less common than going with an automatic. Which is hilarious to me because your typical gun-toting, beer-chugging, red-blooded American muscle car guy is probably driving an automatic.
Really funny meme, Randy. It's really relatable, even though my swapped Fox body is an automatic, but I could still drive a manual. I just don't have one because it was more economical to go with the...
And before you dribble the words "automatics win races" onto your broken iPhone 6 screen, let me ask you a question. Does your automatic win races? Anyway, where was I? As with everything in the LS world, we have about 1 billion options on what we can do for the trans, so I'll just kind of outline my thought process. For the automatics, you usually choose between the 4L60 and the 4L80. For big power, people usually go for the 80 because it's much stronger than the 60, but you can go with the 60 if you like the experience of being in a tow truck or something. Now, most LSs are sourced from trucks and vans, like mine, and they're typically attached to one of these two transmissions, which is a great bang for your buck deal. This is why most LS swaps are automatics. Now, I personally opted to go for a manual transmission. For me, cars are an experience, and I prefer to experience mine with a manual transmission. I'm not out here to set any records. For the manuals, things get a bit more complicated. Basically, the only LS-powered vehicles that came with a manual trans were performance cars. Camaros, GTOs, Corvettes, CTSVs, etc. They all came with a 6-speed transmission called the T56. Now, these cars are much less common than your typical work truck, of course, so these manual transmissions are much rarer. And because so many people are doing LS swaps, those T56s are in high demand. Meaning, if you want one, you're gonna pay. And since it was in a performance car, you know it's had the shit kicked out of it. As a result of this situation, a common alternative is to, instead, adapt the LS to a different transmission. The most common option for this is probably the Nissan CD009, which is typically found in the later model 350Zs or something. For whatever reason, these transmissions are just super stout, and you can get one brand new for like $2,000, which is a steal. The reason I didn't go down this route was because after tallying up the trans and the adapter kit and the custom mounts, it was about the same price as just going with a new T56 Magnum. And if I did go with a T56, it would be the trans designed for this engine, which is a big plus for someone coming into this fresh like me. That's less things to go wrong. So that's what I did. I've never driven something with a new transmission before, but I gotta say, it's nice not grinding into first gear at every stoplight. After driving clapped out Subarus for so long, I kind of forgot that most cars don't do that. I should also mention that I went with a T56 Magnum, not a standard T56. There's a bunch of differences between the two, but I'll just summarize it by saying the T56 Magnum is stronger and can take the abuse better. You can look it up if you want to know more. The swap itself was pretty straightforward. I did hit a few bumps, but from the time I bought the frame to when it was first driving was 70 days, or just a bit over 2 months. It took me about 30 days to get to the first startup.
Give her a whirl.
Here we go. One notable issue I had was I have been trying for well over a week to figure out why my clutch won't fully disengage. Finally, though, I think I found it. It looks like sometime in the past, before I owned this car, the clutch pedal assembly just broke. And they JB welded a piece of flat stock steel in its place to try and fix it. And as you can see, the JB weld just broke, because of course it did. And this whole assembly is flexing whenever I push the clutch, which affects the amount of throw going to the master. So, while the clutch was just barely disengaging, it just needed a bit more. This is why, because this was just flexing enough to stop it from fully disengaging. My God. The wiring was about as I expected. As usual, I went with a standalone ECU. Now, one little quirk about this car is that most of the electronics communicate over a CAN bus, including the instrument cluster. This is how most modern cars are, actually. Now, thankfully, my standalone ECU supports the RX8's CAN bus protocol, so I didn't have to get neck deep in making a custom CAN translator for this one. Now, most everything works. The cluster, the power steering, the heat, it's all there. I even plan to get air conditioning working at some points in the future. Now, speaking of CAN bus, the custom gauge makes its return here. There's been some minor changes, but overall, it's the same one that's in the K-Swap Subaru. Okay, my camera won't pick it up because the refresh rates and all that, but you're just gonna have to believe me that it works. Building another one has inspired me to work on it more, but I just haven't found the time to do that yet. I had a spare line lock laying around, so I decided to slap that in there as well. I had to delete the ABS to fit the engine, so I was doing brake lines anyway. What's a line lock? Well, I'm glad you asked. A line lock solenoid allows you to selectively lock up your front wheels while the rears are still free to rotate. Why would you want to do this? Say it with me now. Hill starts. What? Burnouts? Well, I would never do such a thing. And the wiring isn't fully loomed up yet. I still have a few things that I want to tweak, so I'm waiting to do that. I've had to take the spark plugs out a number of times, which, coincidentally, are right up against the frame rails. Now, thankfully, I've worked on a ton of Subarus, so I'm practically a black belt at tight clearance spark plug removal. Okay, so how's it run? Like a bat out of hell. The first time I started the thing, a bald eagle screeched overhead, Captain America orgasmed, and my student loan interest went up 3%. God bless America. Now, at first I slapped the engine in there bone stock, no performance mods. And that alone was a ton of fun and pretty dang quick, but I wanted a little bit more, so I decided to install a more aggressive camshaft.
What the fuck is the camshaft?
The cam swaps are kind of new to me. With my Turbo 4s, if I wanted more power, I would just turn up the boost. But with this NAT SV8, it's a different story. I read that it would really wake it up, but when you experience this for the first time, well, there's nothing quite like your first time. Sometimes, when I'm laying down at night, I like to just watch these videos. Helps me sleep better. Bonus points to the person who can identify the camshaft just from the sound, without using the parts list. Public reception's been interesting with this car. I haven't had it out for too long, but I've had some comments on it. I was pulling into a parking lot and a couple of older fellas were walking by, and one of them just goes, "Well, that doesn't sound like a rotary." They stopped and chatted with me and were overall quite nice. But what's interesting to me is that these same old fellas, the ones who were gushing over my LS-swapped RX8, probably wouldn't even look twice at the K-swapped Impreza. Which might sound like speculation, but that sort of thing happens pretty often to me. I was at the parts store with the Subaru once, and a kid came over to take a look. He was maybe 14 years old. He asked a bunch of questions, told me about his grand plans to get an S13 for his first car. I mean, it's good to have goals, but I told him he should probably make that one a little more long-term. He was clearly very excited. His dad was there too, and I just remember him saying something like, "Yeah, he really wants one of these little toy cars for some reason." Which is a shame, really. Because this LS-swapped RX8, a car he'd probably love, was built in the exact same spirit as the Honda K-swapped Subaru. A strong, affordable engine put into a frame it simply wasn't meant to be in. Both swaps take similar skills to pull off successfully. Both were built with the same passion and drive. Yet one is entirely dismissed. Now maybe I'm biased, but I feel like the JDM crowd isn't as polarized. Those guys love both these cars. But you don't see that as often with the muscle car guys, despite these two cars being literal parallels, which is a shame. All right, wrap-up time. I am thoroughly satisfied with this car. Big V8 torque is a whole different world to me, and the RX8 itself is just a really cool car. The engine also isn't sticking straight up out of the hood, so I can drive it around without worrying about being pulled over. I do notice there's a distinct lack of boost with this car. Maybe in the future I'll look into fixing that, but for now this thing already has plenty of powers, and I'm not really the kind of person to shaft measure over horsepower numbers. This is actually my first rear drive car, so for now I think I'm just going to focus on not wrecking it. Now I'm sure you'll be seeing more about this car here, so stick around for that. And if you're into that kind of thing, check out my other videos about how I Honda K-swapped a Subaru Impreza, and look forward to some other videos that are less about my cars and more about cars in general. But until then, bye for now. I should probably mention that going with a manual trans in an LS... Fuck. Camaros, GTOs, Corvettes, CTSVs, etc. The 6-speed transmission... Okay. Is it still on? Oh boy. Knocked the brains out of it. For those of you wondering, this is a teleprompter remote. I'm not winging this all off the top of my head. I read it from a teleprompter. What's going on? Oh, there we go. Just had to stand up. All right.